It's Friday. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock, we go live with BGT.
What if I told you the man known for tearing people apart on stage was quietly falling apart off camera? The truth about Simon Cowell will shock you. In this exclusive report, we dive deep into the untold side of Simon Cowell's personal history, a story far removed from the glamorous, stern-faced persona viewers have grown accustomed to on shows like Britain's Got Talent and The X Factor. While the world sees him as a brutally honest judge with little tolerance for mediocrity, few are aware that his unyielding demeanor has roots planted firmly in a childhood shaped by relentless expectations and emotional restraint. Born into a well-off British family in Lambeth, London, Simon Cowell was far from the carefree child many might imagine. His father, Eric Cowell, a prominent music executive, and his mother, Julie Brett, a former ballet dancer and socialite, upheld incredibly high standards, especially when it came to discipline, public image, and personal achievements. From an early age, Simon was made to feel that love and acceptance came with conditions: good grades, proper manners, polished appearance, and socially approved behavior. There was no room for emotional vulnerability or failure, and this pressure to maintain a flawless image began to erode his sense of self-worth. Teachers labeled him as difficult and rebellious, and multiple expulsions from school only deepened his frustration. Beneath the surface of his rebellious streak was a boy silently screaming for approval and autonomy. It is no exaggeration to say that Simon Cowell's signature cold stare and cutting remarks were not born out of cruelty but out of emotional armor forged during years of feeling never enough in the eyes of his own parents. The psychological burden of always striving to be perfect without receiving the emotional validation every child craves left a permanent imprint. Observers suggest that the Simon Cowell we know today, a man often perceived as heartless, is actually the product of years of internalized pressure, a survival mechanism constructed to protect a child who was never truly allowed to be vulnerable. Ironically, despite growing up in a financially privileged environment, Simon experienced profound emotional isolation. Any form of praise or affection from his parents was transactional, based on performance, never freely given. This distorted emotional foundation became the blueprint for his adult persona: confident, aloof, brutally honest, yet always in control. What may seem like arrogance or coldness on television is perhaps a man still haunted by childhood expectations, wielding toughness not as cruelty, but as a shield against the fragile boy inside who was never told he was simply enough. In a world that often only highlights the glamour of success, the early career of Simon Cowell tells a remarkably different story, one marked by devastating setbacks, crushing failures, and a level of humility that few might associate with the now iconic television judge. Long before he became a household name, Simon's journey in the entertainment industry began in the most unremarkable and unglamorous way possible, as a humble mailroom clerk at EMI Music Publishing. Many today might assume that his family connections, particularly his father's position in the music business, paved a smooth path to fame. But those assumptions couldn't be further from the truth. Despite being surrounded by the industry, Simon wasn't handed success on a silver platter. Instead, he clawed his way through rejection after rejection, eventually attempting to carve out his own niche by launching a series of small ventures in the record business. One of his earliest business attempts, a record label called ENS Music, initially showed promise but eventually collapsed under the weight of inexperience and poor financial decisions. The fallout was brutal. Cowell found himself in serious debt and was forced to move back in with his parents, a humiliating experience for a man with such burning ambition. According to several accounts, Simon described this period as one of the lowest points in his life. Friends recall how the young Cowell, often seen as cocky and confident, became visibly demoralized, questioning whether he was even meant to pursue a career in entertainment at all. It wasn't just about losing money, it was about losing belief in himself. Yet, this phase of painful failure became a crucible that would eventually refine his instincts, sharpen his business acumen, and fuel a deeper hunger for success. Unlike others who might have been permanently derailed, Simon chose to start again, this time smarter, leaner, and less naive. He returned to working with independent labels, slowly rebuilding his reputation by taking risks on unusual acts and gimmick records that, surprisingly, began to sell. He learned not just what the market liked, but how to market the unexpected. This trial by fire taught him that the industry doesn't reward entitlement, it rewards resilience, risk, and reinvention. It was in those moments of obscurity, pennilessness, and desperation that Simon Cowell laid the true foundation of his empire. While the world would one day see a confident mogul dishing out scathing critiques from a panel, that version of Simon was born from years of humiliation, missteps, and a refusal to give up. His failure didn't break him, it built him. In August 2020, the entertainment world was rocked by a startling headline that momentarily shifted the public's perception of Simon Cowell from the untouchable, sharp-tongued TV mogul to a man whose life dangled by a thread. It happened in a split second. Simon Cowell, known for his high-adrenaline lifestyle and love for the latest tech toys, was testing an electric trail bike in the courtyard of his Malibu home when tragedy struck. The bike, reportedly a high-powered model capable of dangerous speeds, reared out of control and launched him violently to the ground. The impact was catastrophic. Cowell broke his back in multiple places and was rushed into a 6-hour emergency surgery to insert a metal rod. The man who was once the picture of control and arrogance was now confined to a hospital bed, unable to walk, facing an uncertain future that included the real possibility of never standing on his own again. For days, news outlets swirled with updates, some exaggerated, others eerily accurate. Photos of Cowell in a neck brace, messages from concerned fans and celebrities, and speculation about whether he'd ever return to television dominated the tabloids and social media. But beyond the headlines was the very real, very raw human experience of pain, helplessness, and fear. Sources close to Cowell revealed that the accident brought him to emotional lows he had never known. The man who had always been the puppet master of televised talent now had to rely entirely on others for even the smallest tasks. He couldn't bathe himself, couldn't dress, couldn't even sit up without assistance. Yet in that physical vulnerability, something deeper began to shift. Cowell, who had built a reputation for his biting sarcasm and brutal honesty, started to soften, not just physically but emotionally. During interviews conducted months after the accident, he spoke openly about his brush with mortality, admitting that for the first time in his life, he had truly feared death. He talked about how the accident gave him a new appreciation for family, especially for his young son Eric, who became his greatest motivation to heal. Doctors had warned of a long recovery, but Cowell, ever the fighter, pushed himself through rehabilitation with a kind of humility that contrasted sharply with his on-screen persona. He also made lifestyle changes, adopting a healthier diet, quitting bad habits, and stepping back from some of his professional obligations to focus on healing. This moment wasn't just a medical emergency, it was a spiritual awakening. Fans who had always seen Cowell as a fortress of ego were now seeing a man whose strength was no longer in dominance, but in resilience, humility, and rebirth. And while his recovery stunned the medical community with its speed, the emotional transformation he underwent would leave an even deeper, longer-lasting impression on those who thought they knew who Simon Cowell really was. Few moments in life cut deeper than the loss of a loved one, and for Simon Cowell, the passing of his mother, Julie Brett, in 2015 marked one of the most emotionally devastating chapters of his life. A chapter that shook the very foundation of his famously composed public persona. Julie, a former ballet dancer and a woman of elegance and fierce maternal love, was not only Simon's mother but also his emotional anchor, his closest confidant, and the one person whose approval mattered above all else. Unlike many celebrity-parent relationships that drift apart in the wake of fame, Simon remained incredibly close to Julie, speaking with her regularly, often seeking her guidance even when he was at the peak of his career empire. Her quiet presence had been a constant in his chaotic, high-pressure life, and when she passed away after a lengthy illness, it left a vacuum that fame and fortune could never fill. The timing was cruel. Simon was in the midst of filming The X Factor, a show he had built from the ground up and into a global juggernaut, but upon hearing the news, he canceled all engagements and withdrew from public life. For several weeks, he was noticeably absent. No paparazzi shots, no press releases, no surprise TV appearances. The man who once thrived under the scrutiny of cameras had retreated into silence, mourning in solitude. Sources close to him said he was shattered and lost without her. And for the first time in years, Simon Cowell seemed uncertain, shaken, even broken. Colleagues and friends noticed a shift in him upon his return. He spoke less, smiled more softly, and often paused before responding in interviews, as if weighing the emotional weight of his words. There was a new depth in his character, a gravity that hadn't been there before. During auditions, viewers began noticing more moments of empathy from Simon. A consoling pat on the back, a heartfelt word of encouragement, even tears when hearing contestants share stories of loss. It wasn't just performance. Something had changed. The grief had stripped away layers of performance and persona, revealing a man more in touch with his emotions, more willing to be vulnerable in public. Cowell himself admitted in later interviews that his mother's death made him re-evaluate everything: his career, his relationships, and what truly mattered. He said that for the first time he felt the fragility of life pressing on him, urging him to slow down, to be present, to cherish time with his son and partner more intentionally. It was the end of an era for Simon, the era of invincibility, of bulletproof self-image, and the beginning of a more human, more relatable chapter. In losing his mother, Simon Cowell didn't just lose a parent. He lost his compass, his emotional grounding. But in that loss, he found something else: humility, compassion, and a new way of moving through the world that would shape everything he did afterward, both on and off the screen. Behind the polished exterior and confident swagger of Simon Cowell, the man known for crushing dreams with a single glare, lies a quieter, less publicized truth: the immense and relentless mental pressure that accompanies his towering fame. While viewers around the globe recognize his sharp tongue and commanding presence on shows like Britain's Got Talent and The X Factor, few have ever paused to consider the psychological toll of living under the microscope of fame for decades. Behind the scenes, Simon was struggling to sleep, to relax, to disconnect from the persona he had created and the empire he was constantly expected to maintain. In various interviews, Cowell has subtly peeled back the curtain on his mental health battles, admitting that the pressure to perform, to remain relevant, and to uphold his image often led to sleepless nights and anxiety attacks. Insomnia became a long-term companion, robbing him of rest even as his shows dominated the ratings. At one point, he confessed to feeling wired all the time, unable to switch off from work or escape the ever-looming responsibility of being the man with all the answers. For years, he kept these battles hidden, wrapped in layers of designer suits, celebrity parties, and red carpet smiles. But the facade began to crack. Behind the walls of his luxurious homes, Simon found himself overwhelmed by a sense of emptiness that no amount of television success could fill. There were moments, he revealed, when the thought of walking into another audition room or sitting through another media interview felt unbearable. He became more reclusive, canceling public appearances and reducing his media interactions. The media, always quick to pounce, speculated on his absences, often missing the real story. Simon Cowell, the titan of talent television, was quietly unraveling under the mental weight of the very empire he had built. It wasn't until his bike accident in 2020, which forced him into a long and painful recovery, that Simon was finally able to confront his burnout head-on. In that forced stillness, away from flashing lights and screaming crowds, he began to see the depth of his emotional exhaustion. He started therapy, leaned more into wellness practices, and most importantly, made a public pivot in how he approached mental health, not just for himself but for his audience too. Cowell began speaking more openly about emotional well-being, encouraging others in the entertainment industry and beyond to seek help and to not be ashamed of feeling overwhelmed. His voice, once known for brutally honest critiques, became a surprising advocate for mental health awareness. Today, though he still exudes that unmistakable Simon Cowell aura on screen, there's a softness, a visible shift in how he connects with contestants, how he speaks about life, and how he handles failure. Fame, as he learned the hard way, is not a shield against internal struggles. And now, rather than hiding from that truth, Simon Cowell has chosen to own it, giving others permission to do the same. From the outside looking in, Simon Cowell's job as a judge on shows like Britain's Got Talent and The X Factor might seem like a dream role, sitting on a luxurious panel, deciding who gets a shot at stardom, and delivering opinions that millions listen to without question. But dig deeper, and the reality is far more emotionally taxing than the glamorous setting would have anyone believe. As a veteran reporter covering the entertainment industry, I've followed Simon's career closely, and over the years, a startling pattern has emerged beneath his harsh critiques and signature scowl. The emotional burden of deciding people's fates night after night has taken a toll on the man behind the sharp suits. Simon himself has opened up about the psychological strain of his role, explaining how even after the cameras stop rolling, he finds himself haunted by the contestants he's turned down, especially those who walked off the stage with tears in their eyes and crushed dreams in their hearts. While the world might see a calculated businessman unmoved by sob stories, Simon has admitted that he replays the rejections in his mind, sometimes for weeks. The immense weight of being the final word means living with the reality that your verdict could break someone's spirit or derail their life plans. Even more daunting is the pressure to maintain a specific persona, tough, cold, and unshakable, regardless of how he truly feels in the moment. Over time, this dichotomy between who he is off-screen and who he is expected to be on-screen created emotional fatigue. There were seasons, sources say, when Simon seriously considered stepping away from judging altogether, citing burnout and a desire to preserve his mental well-being. In one rare interview, he confessed that sometimes it was easier to put on the villain mask than to deal with the emotional complexity of making fair, compassionate decisions in the high-stakes world of televised talent. Add to that the constant scrutiny from fans, critics, and online audiences dissecting every facial expression and every comment, and it's no wonder Simon found himself emotionally drained after each season. And yet he kept showing up. Why? Perhaps because, beneath it all, Simon cares deeply about the art, the talent, and the platform he's helped create. But it's undeniable now, being a judge isn't just about catching the next star. It's about managing the emotional responsibility of holding someone's future in your hands, and over time, even the toughest judges crack under that pressure. Simon Cowell may have built a brand around being brutally honest, but the burden of that honesty has left invisible scars, ones that only become visible when you look past the stage lights and into the humanity of the man tasked with delivering hope or heartbreak in a single sentence. In a world where television personas are crafted with precision and emotional vulnerability is often viewed as weakness, the sight of Simon Cowell shedding tears on national television came as a shocking twist for fans and critics alike. Known for his unrelenting critiques and near-impenetrable facade, Simon had long been portrayed as the ultimate stoic, the man who never cracked, never flinched, never softened. But as a longtime entertainment reporter, I can attest that the narrative began to shift, slowly but unmistakably, as moments of raw emotion began surfacing during auditions that carried deep personal resonance. One of the earliest cracks in his emotional armor came during an audition by a young boy singing in memory of his late father. As the haunting lyrics echoed across the stage, Simon's signature stare began to quiver, and for a fleeting moment, the audience caught something rare: vulnerability. His eyes reddened, and a single tear escaped before he looked away, clearly shaken. Over the seasons, such moments became more frequent. From disabled performers who turned pain into breathtaking art, to survivors of trauma pouring their soul into a performance, Simon could no longer hide behind his judge's persona. Perhaps the most talked about breakdown came during an emotional audition where a contestant's story mirrored Simon's own personal loss. The studio went silent as Simon visibly choked up, unable to deliver his usual sharp-witted commentary. Instead, he uttered a trembling "thank you" before looking down, clearly overcome by a mix of grief and empathy. The internet erupted. Headlines screamed, "Simon Cowell breaks down," and fans everywhere debated what had changed. Was this age? Fatherhood? The lingering pain from his mother's passing? Insiders close to Simon pointed out that becoming a father and suffering a near-fatal accident had fundamentally altered his perspective. No longer was he the same unshakable icon of the early 2000s. He had grown, hurt, and matured in ways that were beginning to show through the cracks. In interviews that followed these breakdowns, Simon admitted that he no longer saw vulnerability as a weakness, but as a strength. "You can't bottle everything forever," he once said in a candid moment. "Eventually, it finds a way out." And indeed, it did, sometimes in the form of tears during a heartfelt audition, or in the quiet moments between applause when the weight of memory and loss became too much to bear. These weren't rehearsed breakdowns for camera effect. They were genuine, spontaneous releases of emotion from a man who had long been defined by his stoicism. They showed the world that even the harshest critics carry stories that still sting, and that sometimes all it takes is the right song or story to melt years of restraint. In those moments, Simon Cowell wasn't a celebrity judge. He was a human being, caught off guard by the magnitude of emotion that television can sometimes capture in its rawest form. It's hard to imagine primetime television without Simon Cowell, a figure whose presence has become so embedded in the DNA of talent shows that his name alone is synonymous with suspense, drama, and unfiltered truth. Yet, what many viewers don't know is that there was a period when Simon seriously considered walking away from it all. After decades of relentless work, overwhelming public attention, and the mounting toll of physical and emotional strain, Simon Cowell found himself at a crossroads. The turning point came in 2020, following the freak electric bike accident that left him with a broken back and a long road to recovery. Sources close to him revealed that during those grueling months of rehabilitation, Simon began to rethink everything: his career, his identity, even his purpose. Away from the cameras, he confronted a sobering reality. The empire he had built was costing him more than it was giving. In interviews after his recovery, Cowell openly admitted that he had been running on autopilot for years, trapped in a cycle of production schedules, media obligations, and constant travel. He confessed that for the first time in his life, he no longer felt the same drive to chase ratings or outdo last season's finale. Instead, he craved silence, family dinners, time with his son Eric, and long walks without paparazzi flashes in his eyes. During this hiatus, he stopped taking meetings, turned down major offers, and genuinely entertained the idea of retirement. Not because he was bored or ungrateful, but because his priorities had shifted. He wanted to be present, to breathe, to heal. The Simon Cowell that had once thrived on control and ambition now found solace in unpredictability and slowness. One anonymous friend noted that Simon had started spending more time reading, meditating, and even gardening, far removed from the glitter of Hollywood. The industry buzzed with speculation. Would the king of talent TV really leave it behind? Fans panicked, tabloids theorized, and producers quietly scrambled. And yet, in true Simon fashion, his return to television wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, intentional, and significantly more balanced. When he finally reappeared on set, those who worked with him immediately noticed a change. He delegated more, laughed more, and most notably, he no longer tried to be everywhere at once. He had set boundaries. His return was not a comeback in the traditional sense, it was a redefinition. A choice to participate in the industry he loved, but on his own terms. It was clear that Simon had not only survived his accident, he had used it as a catalyst to reclaim his life. And in doing so, he reminded the world that even icons need time to reset. Even legends deserve rest. And that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is pause, not to quit, but to realign. Simon Cowell, long known for his stern exterior and unshakable presence on global television, experienced one of the most profound transformations in his life when he unexpectedly stepped into the role of fatherhood. A chapter that not only reshaped his identity but softened the image of a man once infamous for his unforgiving critiques. In 2014, the birth of his son Eric came as a surprise not only to the public but even to Simon himself, who had, in many interviews prior, confessed that he never imagined himself as the dad type. And yet, from the moment Eric was born, something shifted. Cowell, then in his mid-50s, found himself facing a kind of love he had never encountered. A bond so pure, so grounding, that it cut through the layers of ego, stress, and professional persona he had built over the years. Friends close to the media mogul say that fatherhood didn't just change Simon's schedule, it changed his soul. Suddenly, decisions weren't made with ratings or brand optics in mind, but rather with his son's future and well-being as the central compass. Simon began reducing his workload, choosing family time over fame, and in rare moments shared on social media and interviews, the world saw glimpses of a more playful, relaxed, and emotionally open Simon Cowell. He started laughing more on set, smiling more in public, and speaking with a gentleness that surprised even his closest colleagues. But with this joy came an undercurrent of fear, one he rarely talked about until after his near-fatal bike accident. The brush with death forced Simon to confront the terrifying question: would he live long enough to see his son grow up? That fear drove a radical change in his lifestyle. He overhauled his diet, cut out alcohol, began exercising more regularly, and committed himself to staying healthy, not for the cameras but for Eric. Simon's priorities were no longer rooted in contracts or competition. They were rooted in bedtime stories, weekend walks, and birthday cakes. His son had given him not just a reason to live, but a reason to heal. In interviews post-accident, Simon openly admitted that he'd never felt more vulnerable than during the moments he imagined Eric growing up without him. That vulnerability became his strength. It humanized him in a way no talent show could. Cowell began mentoring with more empathy, choosing his words more carefully with young contestants, often citing his role as a father as the reason for his newfound sensitivity. Even fans who had once viewed him as the harshest judge began to notice and appreciate the evolution. In the grand narrative of Simon Cowell's life, a saga filled with success, scandal, and sorrow, it was fatherhood that brought the most unexpected yet beautiful chapter. It did not erase the man he was. Rather, it revealed the man he could become. A man not defined solely by his critiques, contracts, or controversies, but by the unconditional love he holds for his son. A love that reshaped not only his personal world but the legacy he will one day leave behind. When the lights go off, the cameras stop rolling, and the audience applause fades into silence, who is Simon Cowell, really? That's the question many have asked over the years about the man who has become a towering figure in the global entertainment industry. Loved by millions, feared by contestants, and endlessly dissected by the media. On stage and screen, he is Simon Cowell the judge. Impeccably dressed, razor-sharp with his words, never afraid to be the voice of brutal honesty in a world often wrapped in niceties. But as a journalist who has followed his journey for more than 2 decades, I can say with certainty that the Simon we see on screen is just one version of a much more complex individual. Behind the curtain lies a man who has lived many lives in one. a child burdened by early pressure to succeed, a young adult who weathered professional failures and financial collapse, a creative visionary who reshaped the television industry, and a survivor of both emotional devastation and physical trauma. He's someone who has cried in silence over lost loved ones, battled anxiety while the world thought he was invincible, and questioned his path even as he stood at the top of it. Cowell has built empires, discovered global stars, and reshaped the way the world consumes music and reality television. And yet, he has also admitted to feeling lonely at times, misunderstood, and even empty despite all the external success. What the public often forgets is that fame is a lens, not a mirror. It magnifies certain traits while concealing others. In Cowell's case, it emphasized his sarcasm and severity while often hiding his humanity. But as time passed, bits and pieces of the real Simon began to shine through. The father who dotes on his son, the partner who speaks gently to his family, the mentor who now encourages rather than destroys. His close friends describe a man who, while still driven, now values kindness just as much as candor. There's still the quick wit, still the no-nonsense energy, but it's tempered now, with wisdom, with warmth, with wounds that have turned into wisdom. This final chapter in Simon's narrative doesn't tie everything into a perfect bow. It reminds us that even icons are evolving. That behind every sharp-tongued critique was once a young boy just trying to be enough. That beneath the fame, wealth, and accolades is a man who has been broken, humbled, and ultimately humanized by life's trials. Perhaps Simon Cowell's greatest transformation isn't one you see in a headline or a talent show finale. It's the quiet realization that healing is possible, reinvention is constant, and no matter how high you climb, what defines you most is how you carry your scars. The man behind the curtain is no longer hiding. He's learning to live fully, publicly, and vulnerably, with all of it. And there you have it, the untold journey of Simon Cowell, a man the world thought they knew, but whose true story runs far deeper than the glare of studio lights. From childhood struggles and devastating career failures to life-threatening accidents and emotional awakenings, Simon's life has been anything but ordinary. But perhaps the most powerful takeaway is this: no matter how strong someone appears on the outside, we never truly know the battles they're fighting within. Behind every glare, every sharp comment, every viral TV moment, there was always a man who was healing, evolving, and quietly redefining what it means to survive in the spotlight. Whether you admire him, fear him, or are only just now beginning to understand him, Simon Cowell's story is a powerful reminder that even the biggest stars have fragile hearts. And sometimes the real talent isn't in judging others, but in learning to face yourself. Speech balloon, which part of Simon Cowell's journey surprised you the most? Was it the accident, the tears, the fatherhood transformation, or the silent struggles behind the scenes? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what resonated with you. Thumbs up, don't forget to like this video if it moved you, share it with your friends, and of course, subscribe to our channel for more emotional, dramatic, and deeply human stories from the world of entertainment. Bellhop bell, hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thank you for watching. Find other interesting videos in our channel's playlist.